Welcome to the great AI debate here on What the Tech, where we'll actually be pitting the two latest artificial intelligence assistants against each other. That's right, OpenAI's chatgpt versus Google's mysterious AI assistant Bard. Now, in today's episode, we'll actually be analyzing these two models and discussing their respective features, capabilities, and performance. We'll actually examine how well they understand natural language processing, discuss their customization abilities, and explore how user-friendly model each is. We'll also compare their performance in terms of accuracy and consider which model offers the greatest and most accurate solution. So tune in to find out who wins this epic showdown between ChatGPT and Google Bard. Let's go. Hi, my name is Troy Vermillion, and I'm here with my co-host for this episode, Steve and Faust, who is actually my friendly neighborhood know-it-all and brainiac. Now, backed by popular demand, Steve will now be making a regular appearance here on the show, both for his technical know-how and also for his charming demeanor, good looks, and funny perspective. So we have a spicy one for you today, and I'm excited to dig in with you, Steve. Good to have you, man.
Yeah, good to be here.
Well, so ChatGPT and Google Bard. Today it's going to be like a showdown, right? And I think we have some insight that we're going to share today that I think really shed some light on where things are at today. And honestly, I'd like to talk a little bit about what the potential future of both of these platforms look like. And so, really quickly, any particular thoughts that you have, on the two platforms that you had before we actually started talking about this? Maybe start there.
Yeah, I mean, initially, I would not call myself an expert, so I'm going to put that disclaimer right up front. But I knew for a fact that ChatGPT had a ton of contributors, just on what I've read or heard from other people, and I knew that Google's, less amount of people had contributed to it. I think it was more of an example of this one was more built in house. This one was at one point, the OpenAI AI was open to a larger source of people writing to it. Now that's kind of changed. I'm sure that'll come up in the conversation as well. But so that was my first impression, was that one of them was very much, you could say fit for purpose for whatever Google wanted to do versus, okay, this one had other companies. And that's kind of why I feel like ChatGPT has more notoriety, even though it hasn't quite been around as long, because again, people see it as more, okay, it's more agnostic. I feel like people's sentiment on it would instantly change if it was called like Microsoft Chat or something like that. Like, I think that would change it, even though they are a huge contributor to it. But those are kind of my impressions. And I'd heard from a lot of my friends who were developers about all its capabilities within that world, within the development world. So that was kind of the frame of reference that I came into it in. But I also saw it from the news where, people were talking about, its positive and negative impact on things like the workforce, people's jobs, and also its ways to influence. Some of the articles I read recently were how other countries are using it in kind of a negative manner, and then they're worried about what's that going to look like here. So, I mean, it's a broad topic, touches on almost every aspect you can think of, but I think it is one that definitely has some merit.
Well, one of my initial observations or thoughts about Google, coming into this space would be that they'd be the juggernaut, that there'd be obvious advantages of having all the data and information. And I think what we actually found in our own investigative process in trying to figure out, okay, which one's operating better right now, I think we're interesting, to be completely frank. And but I did have my own bias, thinking that, well, once Google's in, I mean, they're going to blow everybody's socks off, right? Mm-hmm. Didn't you think that, or what were your thoughts?
I mean, I feel like their core business is queries, which I feel like when you look at these AI instruments, that's the more simplistic way to think of them. Is I'm going to ask something that I'm like a search request, and then I'm going to get results. So most people could think, okay, the AI experience is more just like a more intuitive Google, right, than just straight up click these links. So yeah, I would definitely say from that vantage point, they should have come into it with like a huge advantage. I think it really just proves, though, that um, one of the ways to be successful is to make it more open. And unfortunately, even OpenAI right now is no longer open. That's why there's all these other people trying to spin off and create an open platform. I mean, that's one of the reasons that Elon Musk, kind of lost interest, because again, I think he felt like without it being open to a lot more contributors, and not to say it's completely closed today, but it's definitely not open for development. Now you can say, um, for example, my company, I want it to have some representation on ChatGPT beyond just someone talking to ChatGPT and then it doing a web search and then pulling data back. I want to create my own version of a web page inside of ChatGPT. You could contribute that way, but you can't contribute from the standpoint of, okay, I'm going to try to make it the way its algorithms work better. Like it's not open standard like that. Same way like an operating system like Linux is open. That's one of the things it's prided itself on from day one, is that anybody anywhere can add and improve the platform, versus something like Microsoft, which is the opposite, right? Like I can't come up with a better way for Microsoft to perform the calculator task. Like I can't do that. Like the source code is closed. I'm not contributing to it in any way. And you get different results. I think that's kind of what we're seeing too, from both these platforms, is that Google obviously has leveraged their search capability technology, which, if you think about it from Google's standpoint, what are their big priorities? Quick results. They definitely pride themselves on that. That's why they have the speed result, right? And they also are about, okay, look, we're going to find the most ways to create the best ranking. That's a big thing for Google, is how this person got ranked high. Like, are they when you work with an SEO, search engine optimization, they find ways to make your ranking go up by blog posts, by all this other stuff. And that's
domain ranking.
Yeah, that's how
Domain
Google,
authority.
that's one of the big things. That's how they charge people. And that's also how they say we get good results, because we look at a broad spectrum. We don't just look at one thing. We look at these 20 factors. Now, when you switch that to an AI system, those aren't necessarily the same priorities. Now, I definitely like the idea the AI is drawing from multiple sources, but I feel like, again, it's Google's AI isn't necessarily trying to do that, because again, here's the flip side of that is, as opposed to, let's say I do a search and I get 20 results, they might conflict some of my results. You can't really have a response that conflicts, right? Now you can try your best to say, here are 4 bits of information on this topic, but you definitely can't have a bot that responds back with 2 + 2 is 4, and then also it might be 5. Like it kind of has to pick a horse, right? And they struggle with that, right? Because it's way easier just to say, well, here's 20 possible things relating to what you searched, and let you decide, figure it out, right? And people don't want that from the bot. They want a definitive, what is it, right? And that's, again, where it can be more complicated. And I also think it proves, just because you have money and developers doesn't mean you're going to have an amazing product, right? Because there's a lot that goes into it. And if you even think what put them on the map, their original reason that they came into existence, and I mean, Alta Vista was before them, Yahoo was before them. How did Google rise to the top? Well, they had like 2 guys that wrote a pretty slick algorithm that was hella fast, and that was it. And everybody was really impressed by it, and then it became the de facto standard, and then it's been really hard to dethrone. And so I feel like, unfortunately, you could rest on your laurels because of that, right? Like, Google is one of those where it's risen to become this juggernaut, and people advertise on it, people use it, it's a big deal. But does that mean it's the best? Well, no, because it's really just like, how much of it is name recognition, right? And I know tons of people that use other search alternatives that literally will search Bing, Google, and then they aggregate them. And I actually think that's a smarter way to do things. I like, one of the questions that's going to come up, not to get ahead of ourselves, but I feel like that's one way to potentially try to work around the bias inherent to an AI system, is, since the AI systems are going to keep increasing in number, is to find something that lets you query a bunch of them and then just kind of maybe try to balance out. Okay. Or, to me, that's almost like let's use the Supreme Court, for example. That's why you have 9 justices, not just 1, right? It's because you want those perspectives. And to me, if I was going to perform a query and was worried about bias, I definitely would trust one that was, let's say, even this one's written in the US, but there's a new one that came out, Stability AI, that's based in London. That's where I was mentioning my friend actually knows the owner of that one. So again, getting that international perspective on your query, and that I think you're going to get closer to a more ideal result. Now,
Right.
obviously, some people are going to prefer the sounding boards based on their own preference. I mean, that's why some people just only tune into this one news network, because they really agree with this news network, politics or everything else, and they don't want to, So again, some people, that's why they're going to gravitate one thing. But I feel like if your whole goal is, look, I'm not far right, I'm not far left, I'm middle. Please give me something that resembles reality. That's where I feel like that it could be headed, is kind of finding some way to aggregate that, rather than just relying on one source, one database, one set of responses with these kind of inherent biases.
Well, I do want to get into some of the pros and cons between these two juggernauts, throwing, punches in the back alley. But I wanted to first maybe talk about some of the ethical things or concerns that might be there. Again, these systems might have some bias that could be problematic, as you mentioned, because it's pulling from only a sliver of the data and information that exists out there. And then, the misinformation campaigns that could be created from this type of technology, maybe even creating its own narrative by itself without any prompting of human beings. I mean, imagine that. It's probably already happening at some level. So maybe talk about that. I want to get your perspective.
I feel one of the first things you'll see, I should say, this is what you first see, but I was going to draw an analogy to it, is the first thing it'll say is, look, especially if you ask it a math question, I don't see this, but if you ask it anything else, it says, I do not have an opinion, and I was written by humans who had biases. So it gives a disclaimer. And even when you download or install it, it gives a disclaimer, but to me, it's almost analogous to, like, in the South, especially with females, they like to say something like, well, bless her heart, and then they'll give a negative statement. Bless her heart, she's the ugliest thing I've ever seen, right? It almost like it gives them permission to then spew out whatever garbage they want, right? Because, hey, I was written by humans, so whatever you see after this, not my fault, right? Like, I really don't feel like it gets them off the hook. And I think, unfortunately, in our society, I'd love to tell you that everyone that contributed to chatgpt all came from diverse backgrounds. They represent all 50 states in the United States. They're all ages and walks of life, and we've got this complete, perfect melting pot of, religions and ethnicity. No, it is not the case. It is not the case. It is very much like people, 20s to 40s, right? Is the age range, mostly male. A huge percentage are from California, Silicon Valley, right? So you've just really taken what could be this, let's say, fairly generic system, and put it in a pretty focused area. Now, whether or not you agree with those politics or not, put that aside. You have to admit that there's no way, and people on both sides say this all the time, to enter into something like this and say, I'm going to take any bias I've had my whole life and set it aside and create this perfect thing, right? Like, no, that's not reality. I mean, heck, they even acknowledge it. That's why they put the disclaimer in. But I think, like you said, the real fear is that, they started out, even if it's a minor slant, let's say, political slant like this, after it gets hold of it, you're going to end up way in a certain direction, right? And there's no great button you could push to bring it back the other way, right? That's unfortunate, but that's kind of the thing. It's like, especially since, getting back to my statement about it doesn't want to contradict itself, like, if it takes a stance and then that turns out to be completely false, like, who's going back and updating it? And if that stance led to another stance, that led to another stance, that led to another stance, and then you go back to the, in law, they call it the fruit of the rotten tree, right? So basically they're saying, look, you can't admit this evidence because if you look at how it was obtained all the way back, that first thing was illegal. So now everything that comes from here, you can't do it. Unfortunately, again, it's the same concept applying to the bot. Like, it started off with something that they thought was one way, and then it just kept slanting. This was disproven. It doesn't have a way to deprecate itself. It's already over here, right? And again, you might even update this piece of it, but I don't see the level of sophistication where it's going to go back Same concept as like in the news when they write a retraction. They're like, oh, we thought this was the case, but it turned out that wasn't the case at all. Most of the time, A, it's not front page news. It's buried on the back of page 50. And B, like, how quickly does the truth now make its way back into, you know, the first link on Google? No, probably not, right? It's going to be the same thing with these systems. Like, they're not going to have an easy way to instantly undo, right? Especially if and it's in a situation where, you know, it's ongoing or dynamic, right? It's going to basically grab a chunk of information and it's going to hold on to it, and then it's going to start drawing conclusions based on that, on, and you know, I'm hoping people, you know, take serious the need to go back and keep it updated. But I feel it's also very similar to, like, just take your company, any company. How often do they update their own internal documentation? Not that often, right? Because
Right.
A, it's tedious. B, you know, it has to happen on a regular basis, and nobody wants that job, right? It's not nobody's looking at that. Like that's not great on a resume. I update ChatGPT records. Like what the heck, right? Like it's way better to just let it keep learning, doing its own thing. I don't have to do anything, but you know, who's checking it, right? Who's just validating it, right? If ChatGPT today, and again, that one query I gave it earlier, I was mentioning to you, like the Steele dossier, like who, when it's wrong or says something that's definitely wrong, who's calling it out, right? Like right now, am I emailing ChatGPT support, right? You know, and then they're like, oh my god, we're a guest. It's not updated, right? Like, no, like it's like me yelling at my GPS when it takes me somewhere wrong, right? Now I can try to submit something to Google, like, hey, I don't know what the heck you're thinking. And no offense to Google, I feel like they do a great job, but a few of the other ones out there for the maps completely wrong. And I feel like my feedback goes on deaf ears. Like no one's updating it. It's going to be wrong forever. And it's very frustrating as a consumer because there's no ambiguity. It's not like this could be your house. Like, no, it is not my house. It will never be my house. You took me to the wrong place. And now you're worried that everyone else is going to go to the wrong place and you have no way to stop it. And that's, again, where we're in this crazy world where it's like, well, maybe it is your house. It's like, no, there's no ambiguity. There's no way you could spin this as if it's my house. It's not my house. And that's the problem is I feel like nowadays it's like everybody's like, well, it could be. Like, no, it's definitely, there's certain things should not be, you know, ambiguous.
Well, yeah, obviously where you're located or your home's not ambiguous, but you know, with any technology, there's certainly a growth period where, you know, right now we're kind of on the frontier of it. You're seeing so many new AI platforms kind of pop in. Most of them are using the language models actually directly out of ChatGPT 3.5 or 4. Right. None of them. I'm not familiar with one that now is using Google yet, but I do think that will change over time. But I do think it does say something that Microsoft picked their horse, that they said, hey, we're going to invest in ChatGPT because they obviously believe in the direction that it's going and want a piece of that action. So let's talk about this, kind of play it out. And then we'll get into some pros and cons of some of the things that we've already seen with the two platforms, but specifically, you know, with these two, what does it look like in your opinion, in maybe the next 3 to 5 years, as these things continue to develop, misinformation aside?
Yeah. Well, one thing I was going to point out that I see a lot of people doing, and I kind of alluded to it earlier too, is just like when the World Wide Web first came out, everybody eventually wanted a web page. And then it wasn't just enough to have a web page with text and pictures, that you wanted to have a form where you could submit something, right? I remember even that was cutting edge when you could actually send a message through the web page, right? And now everything's a web portal for everything, right? I mean, heck, what we're talking on right now is through a web portal. So I see in the future that companies are going to want to control their representation. That's going to be critical, right? Because again, today, if I asked ChatGPT about a company, it probably would go to their webpage, pull back some data. But again, like if I started asking it real specific questions, like, hey, what's the next, you know, iteration of this product? It might not know. Or, hey, is this product licensed per seed or per whatever? It might not have any clue, right? I mean, it's all about, I'm a business. I want to control that narrative. And I want to make sure when people are asking questions about my product, not only do they get accurate information, but maybe I provide some mechanism that they can purchase this product. Maybe I provide, you know, different pieces that will help improve that user experience. And I think that's one of the big things is you're going to see it used more in a commercial setting. That's going to be a progression over the years. Just like, I think even last chat we might have talked about that, but just being able to say to a smart device, hey, not just add it to my grocery list, no, actually purchase it for me, complete the transactions. The entire sales process, start to finish, is going to happen within ChatGPT. I mean, today that's a novelty. I'm not going to claim you can't do it, but you'd kind of have to work at it. You'd have to find a real engaged company that would let you do that through the ChatGPT mechanism. But I feel in 3 to 4 years, definitely it's going to be possible. Another thing, again, I feel like I'm trying not to stray in areas that I'm not as expert in, but I know for a fact the Whisper, which is an element of the OpenAI system, which takes your speech, turns it into text, is going to play a huge role, because Whisper, I feel like that is one huge advantage of the ChatGPT Microsoft OpenAI is it is definitely its proficiency and its ability to execute and produce great results is way above the competition, way above Google. So if I'm comparing them, that's one big differentiator I'm going to draw. Because one of the most difficult things way before ChatGPT relating to speech to text, and I know this from my industry, was like having someone perform something like update an address, right? Because it's got numbers, it's got street names, and it could be anything. There's no limit to fields. So if you tell someone press or say 1 or press or say 2, they're either going to say 1 or 2. There's not a lot of things you got to program in to tell the computer. But if it's like, give me your address, that could be anything. It could be a PO box. Could be so the variables that you're giving it orally, there's no limit. Its street name could have 4, elm, maple, like it could have 4 part. So you can't limit the parameters. Computers do really well when you're trying to get information where it has a finite amount of parameters. The moment you make that a completely open thing, it's a challenge for it. But now with Whisper, it's so its proficiency is so high. You bolt on Whisper on the front end, then you've got ChatGPT on the back, because now basically you're taking someone's speech, you're turning it into text, and then you're now saying, hey, ChatGPT, here's what they're asking. And then on top of it, what you're going to do is, back to my example with the business, I want someone that goes to ChatGPT and starts asking questions about my business to kind of start receiving services from my business. But what's even better is the other way around. Now, when they call my business, they call me on the phone, someone answers, right? Now, it's actually the Whisper device. You might not know it's a human. Maybe you don't know in the future. I think that's definitely another trend. But maybe you understand it's not a human, but it's still helping you. And it says, how can I help you? And you say, da-da-da-da-da. It already is leveraging the same logic in my previous example. And it's finite, right? It's a ChatGPT built around your business. So it knows that you can only order 7 types of cable services. And it knows if you order type number 1, it's only available in these areas. So it's not going to offer it to you based on yours. But it basically is acting as an agent, normally a phone agent that would pick up the phone. And it's helping navigate you towards a purchase. Maybe it's helping you with support, but it's performing some type of function. And again, it's using it's ChatGPT in a limited scope that's very personalized to your business. And that to me, I see that easily. It is already happening. Not so much with the voice, definitely with the chat. Like tons of people have, taken their bot, layered in a ChatGPT element, and it's kind of upped its game. But in the future, I definitely see where now you're definitely talking to that thing. It's performing, advanced queries, simple queries. It's letting you pay your bill, change your address, normal things you would call a business for. And then if it gets confused or lost, or, agent, you're really pissed off, it's going to route you to a representative. And today their natural language, again, NLUs have existed, long before ChatGPT. Nuance is a big player in that space. But I feel like the advantage of the ChatGPT is the level of sophistication in that AI is really improving it, where I'll call it the old days, you had to program in almost every question and answer. You had to say, if they ask this, tell it this. If they didn't ask that, it didn't know what to do. ChatGPT, way more intuitive. It can kind of figure out, okay, they asked this, and that seems close enough to this, and then I'm going to draw the connection. That's very powerful. Because if you can imagine, like, how many questions could you ask your bank? I bet it's a astonishingly high number, right? It's probably like 10,000 questions. Does the bank want to have to write 10,000 questions? No. And especially since the bank over time is going to add more services. Maybe they do insurance, maybe they do whatever. That's a ton of not only to create it, but to maintain it and everything else. They'd much rather let this smart gizmo sit in the middle, give it access to all their data, their knowledge base, etc., and let the gizmo figure it out. Which is interesting if you think about it. That's actually what the agents normally do. Like if they put an agent represents a bank, in my example, I guess, they say, okay, here's all the web pages you can go to answer questions. And here's this other stuff, like maybe you have a cheat sheet, but you basically have these buckets of knowledge. Someone calls in, maybe you know the answer, maybe you don't, but you then try to become the manual ChatGPT. You're searching this thing. Okay, what does it say? Does it look right? Okay, nope. Go to the next one. Look, and then eventually you're making some determination. Okay, this guy said da 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 da. This looks like the answer, and then you're connecting the dots. That's again where I feel like that's a good role for it, because it's getting a lot more intelligent about pairing things like Q&A, etc. And that's again getting back to what you originally asked me, the trending. I see a lot of especially interactions you're having with the business over any channel, voice, web page, SMS. There's a ton of modalities you can contact a business. I definitely see it taking on a more prominent role, especially since if you look at the cost right now, that might change. But even things like, it normally bills you per, okay, I'm going to be billed so much per month to have a user license to interface with it, or I get billed 0.0006 cents per API query. The businesses would use the API query, right? And they would basically let it keep performing these queries. But to them, it's got a lot of advantages over a human. Now, I'm definitely not a proponent of saying, okay, in 3 years, no more call center agents, right? Because ChatGPT is taking over the world. I think that's a horrible plan, mostly because there's certain nuances to people that, I don't think it's ever going to rise to that level. I think what you'll basically get to is what I call, on some things, it's great. Where is your business located? You don't need a human for that, right? But I feel if you've got an angry customer or your system has already kind of failed it, right? I think what they want is some personability, right? They don't want some robot telling them everything's going to be okay. We're sorry we let you down. Like it wants a actual person that can relate to their situation, right? That has some empathy and then also can make a judgment call, right? I would feel very nervous letting ChatGPT decide, okay, let's just give them a refund, right? Because then, everybody and their brother could be like, all right, if you say these 5 things, ChatGPT is going to refund your money, right? Versus letting an actual person be like, all right, what happened? All right, okay, and then this other thing happened. You tell your story. Like again, that I feel like you're still going to want people. So I see a blending of the two. Now, how much one or the other, I think it depends on the type of task you're trying to have it perform, and also how big a deal is it? Like if I order some shoes from ChatGPT and they get my size wrong, it's bad, but I'm sure I could. But if I'm like trying to have a medical consult, and that's one of the other components I was going to say is pro one, pro the other, is the fact that the OpenAI is finally starting to go down the process of getting certified in things like HIPAA, the BAA. That's very new. I'm not going to say it's 100% there. It's like maybe 80% there, but they definitely want it to get there. Yeah, you definitely don't want to have a doctor give it a file on a patient and then be like, oh yeah, liver, and then they perform search. Like that is kind of stuff like you really want to blend it with a person, right? You don't want to have it making these snap judgments, right? I mean, unfortunately, we still do it today. You can go to WebMD and type in your symptoms and then think you got some god-awful disease, right? But I think we understand that that's why we still have human doctors, right? Because they can, leverage their experience and whatnot. And I think, so depending on how critical or how important the answer is, I think that's where you're still going to want to have more humans. But I that's again where I don't feel like we should fear it, like complete replacement, right? And in my opinion, this might be cold-blooded, but I feel like if your job is so basic that ChatGPT can do 99% of what you do, you should be worried. I mean, that might be cold-blooded, but I feel like you should take it on yourself to prove you have more value than this basic, Q&A answer thing, right? Like I think that's, you need to take some ownership, right? Like I feel like that's like getting mad at like a barcode scanner because it's doing it so much faster than you could type in the barcode. Yeah, that's its job. And if that's the only thing you do and you got replaced by a barcode scanner, I'm sorry. Like, find another job. Like, that's that's been happening for a while. That's not new to ChatGPT. Let's be honest here, people. Okay. So, like, getting angry at technology, like, you're gonna be angry the rest of your life, right? That's a normal progression, right?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You know, one of the things I was thinking about that I found interesting is I remember hearing Elon Musk, and this is a little bit of a deviation from that, but Elon Musk talking about how real AI would be the demise of human beings if we were to go to that general AI level versus the narrow kind of machine learning that we're dealing with right now, right? And these newer language models that we're starting to see where it, Chat GPT arguably sounds human in a lot of ways, the way that it writes, right? And you can actually, with your prompting, you can tell it from a voice standpoint, hey, I want it to sound this, I want it to sound clever or witty, or I want to sound like Sean Connery,
Mm-hmm.
007. Like, it may not get it perfect, but it's moving in that direction where it could really, find that voice that you're looking for. But outside of that, I think Elon was very concerned specifically about where AI could go, right? And that it could harm human beings in a lot of ways. And I think we could see that on a, microeconomic standpoint, or specifically around these jobs that you're talking about, like these jobs that could easily be replaced by something that can find the answers quicker, probably give better information, especially when you're talking about if it's pulling from that data from company documents or something like that, where the data is fairly pure, and then process it so much faster than a human being who's like, hey, give me 5 minutes, I'll get back to you, right? It's going to give you immediate answers. But what other concerns do you think he had with potentially with the executives? Because he was backing OpenAI for a minute, right? What do you think? He was, I think, concerned about the speed and nature of the advancement, and maybe they're not putting bumpers on the lanes. What do you see as potential things that he might be concerned about?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons he gave from stepping down as owner of one of the companies or one of the executives was that he felt there was a conflict of interest what he was doing with Tesla. Obviously, Tesla has the self-driving cars. There's a level of AI that's a proprietary component to that. And obviously, just self-driving cars that all of a sudden decide humans are targets, right? Like that's a bad thing. So that it's a simple example, but I could see where his logic has some basis. I definitely feel like the issue I had when they all got together and said, look, let's have a hiatus to reassess, put some guardrails in. I feel like there's wisdom in that, but unfortunately, it's kind of like Pandora's box at this point. Like, if the US and heck, the EU decide to take a hiatus and dig in and find some better ways to put up safeguards, our main competitors, China and Russia, I don't think they're not putting a hiatus on it, right? And in this world, this day and age, 6 months, it's like a lifetime, right? Because of the pace the technology pushes itself, right? So I think that's the difficulty, is like, when someone else is not on board with this, it's almost like you're handcuffing yourself. Now, there's definitely wisdom in saying, look, we need to find better ways. But I think just thinking somehow all contributors to this technology are going to pause. I mean, I almost feel like they had the right idea, but no real way to make it happen. One of the other advantages of GPT, you could say, are the plugin elements, right? And the plugins definitely are ways you could modify and tweak it. And I feel like that's where kind of the magic and the danger exists. How sophisticated are these plugins? What type of data are they exchanging? What are they talking to, right? Like, that's its glue to everything else. And I think that's again where you're giving it capabilities, you're making it better at what it does, but you're also giving it access, right? What data does it have access to? What is it doing with this data it has access to? It's like anything else. Some people always make the argument, well, if you got nothing to hide, what do you care if Facebook steals all your data, or ChatGPT for that example? But I think we've proven time and time again that you do have a lot to fear, because it turns into what are they doing as the aggregate, right? Like, are they using that data and then going and doing bad things? Whoever they are, right? Whether it's an AI or a business, are they doing bad things with it? Are they selling it to people you don't want to have access to your data, right? Are they using it against you in some way, right? And I think that's a big concern. ChatGPT is definitely a part of that risk factor as well. Is where is this data going? How is it being used? And is it being used to manipulate people? that's definitely going on, because I feel like there's a fine line between marketing and manipulation, right? If I show you Coca-Cola, and you decide to go, if I showed an ad and you decide to go buy one, well, the ad probably helped. But if I put in the hand of a celebrity or someone you really value, now you're more likely to go do it, right? Am I manipulating you? I'm influencing you. I don't know if it goes to the level of that, but again, like I think where it gets really dicey is, okay, whether you buy or Coke or not isn't really changing the world. But let's say you're someone that has a lot of legal authority. Maybe you're a Supreme Court justice or a senator or whoever, and there's a concerted effort to get you to vote some way or go in some direction, and everyone like, all we need is 5 more votes, so let's like create these algorithms that really influence these key decision makers subliminally, right? They don't know what's happening, but now there's all of a sudden everything they're seeing is telling them that this is the right way to go, and then they make a decision that's very dicey. And the same thing with an election, right? That's why they're all freaking out. The election coming in 2 years is that, like, just like Twitter was caught suppressing conservative speech. I guarantee it's happening more than just Twitter. They're not the outlier. They're one of many that are doing it. Now, how big an influence does it have? We honestly don't know, right? Like, especially if elections are close, though, you can't pretend it's not a factor. It's a factor, whether or not you want to believe it. It's a factor, and I think that's again where it gets very, very dangerous, especially if it's suppressing things. I'd say that's all. I honestly I'm not fear as much as it's spreading bad data as much as it just not even letting actual things come out. That's really scary. And again, what is the recourse? If ChatGPT has access to information, decides not to give it to you, what are you going to do about it, right? What is anybody going to do about it, right? And that's a form of manipulation, right?
Yeah, that's a huge concern. Let's get back to the kind of the two different models, and some of the things that through both of our research we were able to kind of identify as potential pros and cons to both platforms. So I think there's some specific things we've actually spent a lot more time talking about ChatGPT and really just the whole idea of these language models and the purpose and or application for them. But what do you think from just a feature benefit standpoint, how these two systems not only are different today but will continue to differentiate over time?
Well, I think you pointed out some things to me earlier about how Bard is more intuitive to use, and I feel like that's one thing Google really does well, user interfaces. So I feel like that's why I could see them having a strength. Now, a lot of people are trying to put clever front ends on ChatGPT as well, like the App Store I was on just earlier. So I think some of that really comes down to, again, how open is your platform, right? The more open it is, the more people can get creative with front ends, right? Things like that, like your user interface. But I feel like if you're just limited to 2 companies, one's going to come out on top in terms of usability. I mean, people have said that about the Mac over the PC for the longest time. PC's not that intuitive, Mac's intuitive. Has that changed? I mean, I feel like you've definitely seen where Windows starts looking more like a Mac, right? Like in terms of how it positions things, where it puts things. I think they find over time that, oh yeah, this actually is how people want to use the system. But that's definitely where I would say Bard still, is ahead at the moment.
So in your opinion, if you were to use it on a day-to-day basis, would you lean one direction or another right now, just in your day-to-day application of, say, writing a sweet note to your wife, or, telling your kids to put away their toys?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be great. Having it doing an announcement over my Echo, but then having the ChatGPT. Yeah, there you go. I don't even want to yell at you right now. I'm outsourcing it to my little device here. Right. And I give it some parameters. Be mean to my children, but not too mean, right? But do it in a funny voice, so they kind of take their medicine but are having a good time at the same. Like put all these stipulations on it, and then be like, there. And all it was saying is like, brush your teeth and go to bed or whatever like that. But it makes it a whole rhyme poem, thing. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I feel like I see value in it more on the technical end. I don't see myself using it for more of those interpersonal things. So that, to me, the more technical component would be the ChatGPT, especially the more advanced one. Even though I feel like it does a good job on like 4.0, but I feel like it does a good job on both. I mean, I at the end of the day, I feel like it's going to come down to the task you're performing too. Like if you think one's funnier than the next, I mean, who's going to say you're wrong, right? Like I told it to write me a comedy routine and it was terrible. Like, okay, well, like maybe it's true. Who's to say, right? Very subjective.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I actually did a little research and I messed with it a little bit, and I did notice some things about Google versus ChatGPT. One example is I had it write a rap, which I was like, all right, let's see what happens. And Google was abysmal on the rap. It was abysmal. It didn't even rhyme. It was so sad, man. I was like, it didn't even rhyme, like not one part of it. Where ChatGPT, I was like, that's pretty fire. Like, I'm not a rapper, so I actually, well, I actually was like, I was reading it, but I was like trying to flow on both of them, and I was like, ChatGPT sounded pretty good, man. I was like, made me sound like I could actually rap. And I was doing it out loud, like like I was in the shower washing my hair. But yeah, so that was one thing I noticed. But another thing I noticed with Google was that it actually had a little better from like a writing of a blog standpoint. I felt like it sounded better. Like I said, hey, write me a blog, and it sounded like it had more credibility. Just based on my observations. Those are a couple of things I noticed, but I think what's really important, and I think that Google will probably open it up at some point. It's probably a little bit newer model, but I think it is important that we point out the fact that OpenAI is still fairly open in the interfaces that it allows, right? It allows you to use their engine, and then you can apply it in different ways, which I think is advantageous for the advancement of the technology. Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I think I would like it better if you could submit more feedback. Like Wikipedia, I almost feel is the opposite effect. Like you could literally just straight up start editing the page, right? And then I feel like it's really tough because who's moderating it, right? If you're like, no way, Spider-Man's way better than Wonder Woman or whatever, like you could just go off on a thing. And I think, it's like, okay, that's why, like at Mariah's school, they don't allow you to use that as a source because they know anybody can edit it. So I don't think you want to go that far where it's like anybody can change it. Like, you're wrong, ChatGPT. Here's the real answer. Like, that would be dicey. I mean, it would be changing every day. But I also feel like not allowing you to like let's say ChatGPT has an answer and I don't know, 85% of the users say this is not right. I think they should be able to allow that level of feedback to say, hey, look, we've had 1 million people tell us this is wrong. Alert, red flag, right? Something, whatever you want to call it, disinformation, fake news, whatever. I think there needs to be some balance to it. And I definitely don't see it as where everybody can edit it. But I also feel like not having a way to kind of say, look, this is, an issue, especially like we talked about. Maybe they're not doing it on purpose. Maybe they're just lazy. They can't get around to updating it. But I think that should be a big part of it. And just like, I almost feel like they should do it where, let's say it has some kind of meter or scale, and it'd be like 95% of the people said no, like this is wrong. I think that, and then you can take it for yourself, like, oh well, they're skewing the numbers. Like people say that about Amazon reviews all the time. They're made up, or people are faking it. I'm sure there's going to be that, but I honestly would rather have at least some way to be like, look, people say that, with 95% confidence, all users say that this is not a thing, right? Like this is wrong or outdated. That I would trust that, right? Especially if it's a high number. If it's like 5 people, oh, well, whatever. But if it's 1 million people, like everyone that's seen this is like wrong, I'd be like, yeah, this is probably wrong. Just like if you get on, iTunes or Apple Store and then say, okay, it's had 10,000 reviews. All of them are half star. Well, you're probably not going to buy that thing, right? You could be like, pass. This thing's trash, right? But unless you somehow think it's a conspiracy, 10,000 people all bought this thing and marked it low. Like that, I feel is, kind of like, okay, good luck with
that's
that.
That's a major trolling.
yeah. It's extreme trolling.
But if I'm the person you downloaded 10,000, songs of, and, or at least 10,000 reviews, right? You're probably talking about a couple 100,000 actual downloads. I'm going to be like, all right, I'll take the negative press. You paid what for it? No,
yeah. You earned it.
Yeah. Any press is good press. Mm-hmm. Some people feel that way anyways. So what are your thoughts, about some of the requests that, leaders in the space are actually saying, hey, we really need to pump the brakes on this because, this development is happening too quickly, and there's concerns around the risk of that, whether it's misinformation and or, other things, just like, that could be problematic. What are your thoughts about that? Do we
Yeah.
do we put the brakes on, or do we continue to push forward with caution?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of alluded to it earlier, but it's more about if we could get a buy-in from everyone that's using it or advancing it, then sure, I think there's a lot of smart. And I don't think because the rest of the world isn't on board doesn't mean we shouldn't. But I also feel like pumping the brakes in terms of hey, let's stop the technical growth just dead in its tracks. I mean, number one, I'm not sure how you would even regulate that, right? I mean, that'd be like saying, like we run into this with nuclear proliferation, right? All right, like we're not going to build any more nukes. Everybody agree? We all agree. And then it's like, how do you know, right? How do you know, company? Because think about it, that'd be very clever. Everybody buys in, but then you secretly keep advancing your AI with no limits. And then the hiatus is over, and we've got the guardrails, and you're like, "Oh, look how advanced I am." I mean, I was, just happened to happen. Like, yeah, like that'd be real. How would you stop it? Right? Like, take away all the keyboards? Like, what the heck? Right? Like, like, I think that's policing it. Even if there was universal agreement, I think would be very, very difficult. That to me is why it was kind of weak when I feel like they offered that up. It's almost saying like, "Hey," that's almost like saying cars are dangerous and we should do something about it. It's like, okay, what? Like, I don't disagree. A car could definitely be dangerous. They go run into a person, run over a person. Are we gonna stop using cars? No. Okay, how are we gonna make them safer? Now, if you say cars are dangerous, especially AI ones, but I'm gonna basically put in some technology to make sure that it can identify a person from whatever, a butterfly. Yeah, that's a like you identified a problem and then you kind of came with a solution. I feel theirs is very half baked. Like, hey, these things could go in a bad direction. I mean, I feel like that's been technology from day one. Is that it could go wrong. I mean, heck, they got the Terminator movie that came out in the 80s, right, or early 90s. I mean, yeah, like like yes, robots running around shooting people, bad. Like, does not go there. But again, like, what's the solution? No robots? Like, heck no, I want my Amazon tomorrow. We better get the robots on it, right? They got friggin' drones flying around, right? If they start coming after me with knives, I'm gonna be like, oh, bad idea. I feel like that's kind of a no-brainer. Like, we see where we don't want it to go, but we also want all the benefits. So it's not like I actually, in that article I sent you earlier, they actually created a department in the government to study and monitor AI, because I could see, I'm not a huge one for government regulation or oversight, but I also feel like not having it at all is almost like, every plant that produces chemical waste being like, just do what you want. Like, no, we definitely should have something in the middle that says, okay, what are we doing? So I see, that being a potential solution to this is just having a group that is, again, well represented on both sides, that is saying, okay, how do we not stifle business, but we also don't want to end up with, where he's showing up at the house with the, the guns, right? We're like, oh crap, we let it get too far, right? Like, over the top now. That's all he does, right? Like,
Well, obviously the whole Skynet thing is not an ideal outcome for AI. I do think that there are fears from people out there. I mean, legitimate fear and legitimate reason to have fear that AI could potentially do that, but we're not there. We're a long ways away from that. So I think anybody who's listening to that probably knows that. But I do think that just ethically, there's some things that we need to consider, as we deploy these things, because easily could have these misinformation campaigns that are actually done on purpose. And then leveraging the power of, a system that never sleeps, right? And then never, and honestly, doesn't even need, with some of these layovers, these applications that'll connect to it, doesn't even need you to prompt it. If you build the right algorithm to put out information, it could be blog posts. It could be, I mean, you see some of this technology now creating AI videos that are pretty impressive. AI videos, deep fake stuff. I mean, it's, you could get in some deep water pretty quickly. So I do think that there's inherent risks there, but you also can't stop the development of this, because that's going to inhibit a lot of business opportunities as well.
Mhm.
As social and economic opportunities to improve our lives in a lot of ways. Think about, if you're able to leverage an AI like this to help you pre-screen for things like cancer. Like, I know that this is like more of a language focused thing, but these types of algorithms that can go, hey, look at, maybe case studies or examples of other, medical situations, and say, hey, there's some early indicators here that there might be a problem. And then Mr. Doctor or Mrs. Doctor actually goes in and evaluates. So, well, is that really the case, right? Did they do did it come up with the right information, and should we test more, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like that's where again you got to be smart. You got to build it up over time. But I feel like yes, definitely it could rise to that level. That's why they're going down the HIPAA path, right? And I think where it gets complicated though is like just even things on the legal standpoint, which that could be a whole nother podcast. But if ChatGPT deliberately or inadvertently releases sensitive medical information about me, how do I seek justice, whatever that
Yeah,
looks like, right? Like, do I
retribution.
go after, the OpenAI company, Microsoft, because they're a big contributor? Like, who's responsible, right? And especially if it's one of those things where, like somebody did something to put a barrier in place, firewall or whatever you want to call it, and then ChatGPT, through its learning algorithm, found a way around it, right? They never told ChatGPT to break its own barrier, right? But it, again, deliberately or inadvertently, I feel like to the end, the person suffering, they're not really going to care the difference. But I think that from a legal standpoint, that's very challenging. Who do you go after? Who's responsible? Especially when you have different platforms that a ton of people contribute to. Is it all of them in the aggregate? They're all going to cut you a check for $50 that adds up to what? Like, how do you civil or criminal, right? Like, how do you putting programmers in handcuffs, right? Like, again, it's very dicey, right? Like, if I talk to a company like Blue Cross Blue Shield and I exchange medical information and they divulge, it's pretty easy. Like, I can file a claim against Blue Cross Blue Shield of whatever, and they have to be represented in court. But I feel like it is going to be the diciest day when ChatGPT is in a courtroom. Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? Who's responsible? Right? Because I guarantee you that it's going to be nothing but the finger pointing. Well, I put this in place to stop it, and I never told it to do that, and it did that on its own. Like, where does the AI stop and the human responsibility begin? Like, again, I feel if you're the one getting sued, you're like, oh, it's 100% the AI. I never told it to do this thing, right? But again, we don't really do well from a legal standpoint when it's like, well, we don't know whose fault it is. Like, that's not a good thing, right? Or who to blame, or how much they should be liable for. And that's why, again, like, I'm sure a lot of legal people are just like trying to avoid it like the plague. Like, I don't even want to deal with it. I don't want to touch it. Like just don't give it anything sensitive, right? But I also feel if you do that, you're never going to get the medical benefits like you talked about. So there's got to be a middle ground. But again, it's not; these aren't simple problems. And there's not going to be simple solutions. So.
Well, I can't say that we've wore this topic out, but we've come to the end of the show here. So what I want to say is that, like, look, I think there's more to talk about on this subject. I think what we'll probably do is come back and circle back to not only the Chat GPT versus Google Bard conversation, but I think we'll circle back to this topic again, as things continue to evolve, and as we see more things, happening in the marketplace. But I do think it was a good conversation, Stephen. I appreciate you coming on here. And I always like to say, hey, is there a good place for people to, reach out to you or follow you? I know that it's LinkedIn. We'll get that on the page here as well. But I actually look forward to having Steve on here quite a bit more. So he's kind of my resident smart guy, wise guy, and funny guy, all wrapped into one. And so
Nice.
I'm looking forward to having you on here more.
Yeah, definitely. If anybody wants to hit me up, especially if they think I completely botched the topic, I'm more than happy to humble myself to the internet community. So for sure, give me some comments, feedback. I'd love to hear kind of what your take is on some of these topics. I think I'm never going to say I'm honestly the expert on anything. I just kind of take what input I can glean from others, try to represent it the best I can. But yeah, definitely more than happy to receive some feedback. So.
Absolutely. Hey, and if you enjoyed this episode and would like to see more, make sure you comment, hit that subscribe button, like it, and give us feedback on, what you'd like to see next. And, hey, what kind of tangents you'd like to see Steve go on in the future. Those are always fun. So thanks for listening to this week's episode of What the Tech.